Continuing on the Scientology series, this book takes things in a somewhat interesting direction, especially considering that the first thing he tells you at the beginning of the book is that you could go mad when reading it, and to keep it away from those that are too fragile psychologically. So the techniques he's teaching here apparently are dangerous, or at least that is the way he sees them. Somewhat of a distance from his original idea in Dianetics, in which there's really not much of a danger in doing any of it. And I've mentioned in another review that already in another book, he starts changing a bit his perspective and talking about how these techniques should be done with caution. Nonetheless, very interesting and entertaining book. So if you want to learn more about it, stay tuned. Welcome to biblioCultist, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, history, and fiction. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, comment on the video, and click that bell so you get notified when I put out a new video. Also, check out my socials. I'll put them on the bottom and on the side. My X account, Ko-Fi if you want to do a recurring donation to help the channel out, or a single donation. Anything you do will help, including sharing, putting a comment. Doesn't matter if it's an emoji or whatever it is, it helps the algorithm. So if you like what I'm doing, that would really help me out. Also, for those that are new to the channel, I always expand on the topic by putting in the bottom a reference to a particular show note, and when you go to the show notes, I expand a little bit, either define a term or give you more information or make a clarification if needed. Not necessary, but it will enhance the experience. Now in this episode, I'm going over Self-Analysis by L. Ron Hubbard. This book is by Bridge Publications, 2007. Now, one of the important things to comprehend with Scientology, philosophically speaking, is the fact that his epistemology is existential, relativistic, at its very core. To him, truth, reality itself, is more of an agreement among parties, and it's not really anchored on objective standards. Now, this may seem to be weird because as you go through his books, it's pretty transparent that he believes in axioms and things like that, but keep in mind that he believes these things are just practical applications of ideas, because if you don't have axioms or standards, it's almost impossible to speak, and this is a philosophical truth that he is quite aware of. But nonetheless, at the base of its entire philosophy is a notion of subjective experience and relativism, and some people would call it existentialism. Now, this is important because this book is the first one that I've seen in the series that mentions the Supreme Being. Now, he has made allusions to it before, but here he makes a very clear, definitive statement in which he states that the Supreme Being is an entity that actually defines and gives a command to all existence to survive. So now you do have this entity that now is pretty active in the story, pretty active in his system, and it's actually commanding or establishing a standard, a meaning of life, an axiology, if you will, survival at all costs. And he is anchoring this on the Supreme Being. Now, the Supreme Being is not defined, so far, although his epistemological foundation is relativistic, by his own words, he is anchoring the basic motivation on survival to a being that is not actually defined. So if you define the Supreme Being as also being relativistic, then it would cancel out the Supreme Being. I'm not saying he's saying this, I'm just saying if the being is not defined, it's difficult to then determine what is it doing, and why is it assigning a meaning to life, a teleology. Because if everything is relative, the telos would also be relative. Now let me quote from the book to expand on this a little bit. Quote, "Stated simply, Life must first accumulate enough matter and energy to make up an organism, such as a human body. It must then ally the organism with friendly and cooperative organisms, such as other people. It must continue to procure additional matter and energy for food, clothing, and shelter in order to support itself. Additionally, in order to survive, it must do two specific things which, beyond the necessity of allies, food, clothing, and shelter, are basically important. Life must procure pleasure. Life must avoid pain. Now here, he's not only giving you a telos, he's actually interpreting it further into another notion, which is pleasure versus pain, a dialectic. And this dialectic is fascinating because, as those that have studied philosophy before, the pleasure notion as the source of all intentions is quite close to Epicureanism, hedonism, etc. Now keep in mind that his structure with the 8 dynamics is quite conservative, traditional. It starts with the self, of course, but then it expands to the family, and then it expands to the group, and then expands to humanity as a whole. Then it expands to all living beings and creatures, and then it expands to the universe itself, then to theta, or the soul, and then to the supreme being, or infinity, because he sometimes uses the word infinity interchangeably with supreme being. Again, not a definition, an alternative way of looking at it, but it's not clearly defined. So here now we see a development in Scientology. It's going from Dianetics to Scientology, and you see already some basic notions of philosophical grounding. Now, survival itself, he calls it winning, and he also makes another dialectic. And if you may remember, if you haven't seen the previous review, in that book, Science of Survival, he actually goes into the notion of dualism, in which he states that dualism is the very basis of his system, that existence cannot even function without dualism. So he carries that through here with the notion of winning and losing, pleasure and pain, and of course, winning and losing are actually somewhat relativistic concepts. One thing is to say survive, live or die, even to say light and darkness, but winning and losing is so contextual that it falls back into a subjective aspect of a system. But survival wouldn't be. Survival is pretty straightforward, but by interpreting as winning and losing, it changes a bit the dynamic. Now, I must say, of course, the language that he uses, he's very precise in language, and actually Scientology is one of the most linguistically obsessed and focused religions I have ever seen. Language is everything in the system, which may explain its conceptualism as a basis. Some might even argue it's nominalism at its base, but I think it's closer to conceptualism. Then again, conceptualism and nominalism are closely related, of course. But the concepts are very intuitive. Reading the book is actually pleasant because by simplifying these concepts, it makes the viewpoint easily accessible. You can understand life fairly easily with this kind of black and white dynamic, which again, no problem, except that the epistemology is relativistic, so it's a little confusing, and it could end up being confusing later on as the system develops. I'll find out as I go through it. Now, the book is also fascinating because it's not exactly self-auditing. It's more like being audited by Hubbard himself through the book, which tells me that Hubbard was not necessarily, at least my impression from reading this book, is that he's giving you the techniques at a very low price by just buying his book, allowing you to explore the system, even being audited by him through the book. And most occultists, most mystery religions, especially in the modern world, hide everything behind a paywall. And I've seen people online criticize Scientology for this, but the truth is, they don't hide this book. You can just buy it, and if you follow this, you never have to show up in a center. Now, L. Ron Hubbard does say that a lot of times doing it with a professional would be a better idea, but it's still there, the fact that you could do it by yourself. So that diminishes a bit the criticism from my perspective. In this book, he also places the tone scale chart again in the center of it, and Half of the book is really a workbook in which he asks questions and you can fill them out. He even gives you a small paper disc at the end that you cut out, and you can use it as you go through the questions to answer the questions yourself and kind of do a little bit of self-analysis. And that's actually quite a fun part of the book. It's a workbook, it's interactive. Not a lot of books are that interactive, so the fact that he went through the trouble of kind of developing this idea of an interactive book in which you engage it as a workbook is actually very cool, and I respect it. Let me go through another quick quote here, and this has to do with language that I mentioned earlier. It's very important in the system. Quote, "With the invention of language, man brought upon himself an unexpected source of aberration. While language itself is very far from the whole reason an organism is less successful than it might be, our current social order lays undue stress upon language. Words are only symbols which represent actions. A child learns these actions very early and learns the symbols which represent the action. Later on, he begins to mistake the action for the symbols and begins to believe the words themselves have force and power, which they do not. If you believe that words have force and power, hold your hand in front of your mouth and say a few words. You will see how negligible is the force of utterance, no matter what words you use." So here you can see, although he stresses language in a very dramatic fashion through Dianetics, the whole thing of aberration is based on language, of words that you have in your reactive mind, and they're the ones influencing your life and destroying it, basically. Here he's arguing that language, although it's very important, and although he even places a lot of power into them, at the end of the day, they're powerless. It's a form of reverse nominalism in a weird way, but I still think it falls into conceptualism, because he's still saying that these things outside of you are not actual universal realities, but are more creations of words, and these words are basically the ones that interact with your conceptions. And that words could be interchanged or even removed, but the concepts will still be there, but the concepts are the ones that define reality. So it's relativistic and conceptualist. At least that's my interpretation. If you disagree, put it in the comments. I'm always open to hear another point of view. Now, this last quote here is important to me because I think it clarifies a few things about the system. Quote, "So long as an individual maintains his own belief in his ability to handle the physical universe and organisms about him, and to control them if necessary, or to work in harmony with them, and to make himself competent over and among the physical universe of his environment, he remains healthy, stable, and balanced, and cheerful. It is only after he discovers his inabilities in handling organisms, matter, energy, space, and time, and when these things have been sharply painful to him, that he begins to decline physically, become less competent mentally, and to fail in life." So you can see there that his notion of existence is about competition and of struggle between the thetan, which is the soul or the living being or the consciousness, and matter, energy, space, and time, which is somewhat objective, but at the same time is relative to the perception. And this mess has no consciousness. It's just raw material, but these two things are always in contrast. So again, even though it seems to be dualistic, he says that he's a dualist. But at the end of the day, it is monism, because Mest and the thetan are always together, exchanging, struggling like the yin and the yang. So therefore, it's actually one reality with internal distinctions, which is qualified monism. Now, I must say the book does have very good practical advice, especially when it comes to how to treat children, when it comes to respecting their abilities and allowing their confidence to manifest, to let them make decisions of their own. As a parent, it is very easy to fall into the desire to be overprotective. And this is a good example of how love sometimes can become toxic, because it suffocates a child and doesn't allow him to manifest correctly. And then he may develop a fear of existence itself, which is quite terrible and quite damaging. So I do think he gives really good advice on that topic, for sure. All in all, a very fun book. Again, the greatest aspect of it is the questions that he places, the workbook element of the book, It reminds me of the Catholic tradition that I grew up in which we were taught to do an examination of conscience. My grandmother taught me this when I was a child, and it had a good effect on mental health. You can see this through the history of the practice because it allowed the person to analyze themselves, kind of view their activities as impactful in the world, meaningful, and trying to retract, fix, and somehow always direct your life in a positive fashion. A difference between that technique and the one that Hubbard proposes is the fact that the source of authority, the notions of good and evil, in the Catholic system were objective, just like they are in Sanatana Dharma in India, just like they are in Islam, just like they are in Orthodoxy, etc. Their epistemology is based on a notion of objective absolute truth, and their morality is anchored to that. But Hubbard, because his epistemology is relative, then his system is really anchored on shifting sands, at least from my point of view. And that could be problematic at some point down the road in the practice. At first, it may not matter because the advice is very good. But as you develop in the system, if you're not being anchored in something that goes beyond you, that it's outside of your perception or of your particular agreements with other living beings, that steps outside of that, then at some point it may be very tempting to shift the very anchor around and therefore collapse your system. So, something to keep in mind. Like I said, my intention with this review and with this series, as I go with other religions as well, and I do series of philosophy, etc., is to make you think about the ideas and maybe have you agree or disagree with me, but enough to make you think about it sufficiently to at least go through the process, and maybe encourage you to get this book after you've gone through the other ones if you're interested in religion. And if you are a Scientologist, then maybe appreciate a different perspective on how a person who's not part of that religion can study it and try his best to be as objective as possible. True, 100% objectivity doesn't exist, but you can get close enough if you are sincere, I believe. So thank you very much for being with me, and please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, comment on the video, and click the bell if you want to get notified. And doing all these things really helps the channel out. So if you like what I'm doing here, please do these things so more people get exposed to the content. So thank you for being with me. See you next time.